The American people are entitled to a debate on the fundamental issues of what government should be, how big government should be, and whether or not we are going to reduce government to a fraction of its present size, which in my view is what the American people would like to see.
Could you explain to the American people what the libertarian position is on the Second Amendment, and then secondly, why you hold that position?
Thanks, caller.
Well, the Second Amendment, of course, is the right to keep and bear arms, and I believe very strongly in that. Government gun control doesn't work any more than government mail delivery works, or government education, or government crime control. Gun control is a means of disarming the American people and leaving them defenseless in the face of criminals. It also is a way of leaving them defenseless in the face of government. Every totalitarian government around the world has first disarmed its citizens so that they couldn't fight back when things got tighter and tighter and tighter, and more oppressive regulations, more oppressive rules. I believe absolutely in the Bill of Rights, and the only litmus test I will give a federal judge is, first of all, do you believe in the Bill of Rights as a literal document, or would you allow freedom of speech to be stamped out on the internet or someplace else if the government can show a so-called compelling interest? Do you believe in the absolute right to keep and bear arms, or would you overrule that if some lunatic shoots up a restaurant in Texas? And right on down the line, do you believe in the absolute right for search and to be safe from search and seizure, or would you overrule that if a DEA agent thinks that a black man in an airport is dressed too flashily, or maybe has $400 on him and must be a drug dealer thereby? We have to accept these things as literal documents, and if we don't, then they don't have any meaning whatsoever. We have to realize that government doesn't work. It can't deliver the mail on time. It doesn't educate our children. It doesn't keep the cities safe. Nothing that government says it's going to do ever turns out that way. The civil rights laws have not brought about racial harmony in this country. They've brought about a tremendous conflict between classes, between races, between genders, between people categorized in all kinds of groups, and they have fed tremendous quantities of lawsuits.
Do you believe in affirmative action?
Heavens, no. The federal government should not be involved in any kind of discrimination whatsoever. We have to look at the Constitution and treat it as a literal document. The Constitution gives no authority to the federal government to be involved in welfare and education and affirmative action in housing, transportation, regulation, crime control, agriculture, healthcare, any of these things. And if the Constitution is going to be abrogated just because the politicians think they might be able to do some good, then the Constitution is meaningless. But the important thing is to realize that there's a great sense of let's pretend that goes on. Let's pretend the war on poverty really helps poor people. Let's pretend the war on drugs really does eliminate drug use. But none of those things happen. Government doesn't work, and we're paying $1.5 trillion for it every year. So let's reduce it to the absolute minimum possible. Not reform it, not find a better manager, but reduce it to the absolute minimum possible. There is no bill that you could introduce on the House floor or the Senate floor that would be laughed out because it was so palpably unconstitutional, or that it was so far out of the reach of the federal government. As far as politicians are concerned, there is nothing that they can't do. But that's what the purpose of the Constitution was, to limit the government to certain specific functions and no more. And that's why they passed the Bill of Rights, is because so many people were afraid that the government was still going to break through the bounds of the Constitution and start censoring free speech, start taking away their arms, start engaging in the very things that King George had engaged in. And of course, today our government is far more oppressive than King George was.
I think you should explain why you would repeal the income tax.
The income tax is the biggest intrusion that we face from the federal government. It means that people can go rifling through your bank account looking for evidence with which to hang you. It means every American has to fear making a harmless error on his income tax return and then being convicted for it. It means all sorts of intrusions. More than anything else, though, it gives an unlimited source of income to the government. And once we repeal the income tax, it will be very difficult for the government to get back into welfare, education, housing, and all these other areas, because you simply cannot raise enough money through tariffs or excise taxes in order to do the kind of job that the federal government has done in expanding itself. Social Security is headed for bankruptcy. There is no way that everybody can get out whole except one way, and that is to sell off the vast properties that the federal government owns, the western lands, the pipelines, power companies, oil rights, mineral rights, commodity reserves, unneeded military bases, unused military hardware. Put all this on the auction block over 6 years, and with the first proceeds that come in, I want to buy private lifetime annuities for those people who are dependent on Social Security today so that they will get out whole, but the rest of us will be free from the 15% payroll tax forever. And then we go on continuing to sell off those assets and pay off the federal debt.
Philosophically, I agree with a lot of the things that you say, but one of the things that I have a very hard time swallowing is your repeated statements to get drugs legalized. And I would like you to explain to the American people how you feel America would be a better place if drugs were legalized.
Oh, I appreciate your bringing that up, and it's a very thoughtful question. I understand the fear that people have about that, but we have to realize that before there were drug laws in this country, there were no drug problems. The drug problems have all resulted from the drug laws. There was a time in this country when a 10-year-old child could walk into a drugstore and buy heroin, and yet, as a matter of fact, despite the unrestricted availability of drugs, there were no drug problems. No muggers on the street trying to support a $100 a day habit, no gangs fighting over monopoly territories, no pushers on high school campuses trying to hook kids on drugs. All the problems that we think of as part of the drug abuse problem are really flowing from the war on drugs. And the only thing that I know of that would reduce crime dramatically in this country is to end this insane war on drugs once and for all.
Steve Loeb faxes in, Mr. Browne, I suppose you don't mind flying in unchecked airplanes, eating spoiled meat, driving on dirt roads, drinking water full of bacteria, driving cars that explode. You get the point. He says, how can you continue to claim that government is all bad? It's absurd. And another view from a viewer in Houston, Texas, Tom Glass, says, please ask Mr. Browne how we would get safe meat without USDA inspections.
How did we get safe meat before there was USDA inspections? I don't. The first one asked, would I want to eat unsafe meat? Of course I wouldn't. So I wouldn't buy any meat unless the seller of the meat could prove to me that the meat was safe. It's that simple. I don't buy any product unless I'm satisfied that it's going to do what it says it's going to do, and the government doesn't, for instance, certify that the software that I'm going to buy for my computer is not going to make the computer blow up. The government doesn't certify that all kinds of things that I buy are safe, that they're competent, that they will do what they say they do. I have to do that, and I do it, and you do it, we all do it. As a matter of fact, without government preempting this field, we probably would have far better regulation, because companies that do sell sensitive things like meat and other products would probably tie their certification to insurance, so that if something went wrong, you'd be reimbursed for what went wrong, instead of the government just saying tough luck when the government fails to protect us.